I like that music, it's good. Thanks, Deb. It's good to be with you all. It's good to be with ADL again after, 3 years, I guess, of not meeting in person. And it's been many years since I've been in different ADL meetings, conferences. I met with Abe Foxman and then Jonathan back when I was in the White House 30 years ago. Worked pretty closely with ADL on some issues, so it's really a pleasure to be here and to commend you for the good work you all continue to do with new threats, as we've just heard, and new challenges. There's so much to say about the current moment, and I'll just have a few minutes, which is good, so I'll just make 3 brief points maybe to help think about the challenges we face. I'll talk a minute about agency, a fancy word for, let's say, responsibility. I'll talk about leadership, and I'll talk about contingency. Agency. I think it's very important, there are many reasons we're in the problem, we face the challenges we face. History, culture, technology, obviously, social media, the iPhone, the politicians, polarization, you name it. But I think it's very important to hold people responsible for their actions, not to get so lost in or so entranced by the complexities of these historical and sociological explanations that we sort of lose sight of the fact that people are responsible for what they do. That is a core principle of any decent society, obviously. It's a core principle of the law. It's a core principle that I think we all try to teach our kids and hopefully live up to in our personal and our own lives, both private and public. You can't have a decent society if people don't accept this principle of agency or responsibility. And as I say, we forget that a little bit. We tend to explain what's the French saying, to understand everything is to forgive everything. That we understand so much that we talk about people as if they're victims. How do people get led into this? Well, of course, there's some truth to that. People do get led into things by malevolent leaders, by social media, by all kinds of things. But you can't excuse those people. We need to hold people accountable. And I think what we need to hold them accountable for is pretty simple. We don't need to have inquisitions as to their private views. We don't need to have social media mobs go after them for something foolish they said, or if something they said that's a legitimate policy position is taken by someone who's an illegitimate fomenter of hate and used. That's not that person's fault necessarily, though they should think about that in the future. But I think the principles of no inciting to violence, no dehumanization, no discrimination, to take the original ADL meaning, those are important principles to uphold. So I would just urge people, I see this a little bit in our public discussion, a little bit too much explaining, a little bit too little holding people, whether they're famous or not famous, whether they're 75 years old or 25 years old, holding them accountable for their actions. A lot of people criticize the Justice Department, for example, for prosecuting, 1,000 of the insurrectionists on January 6th, when they haven't yet at least decided whether to prosecute former President Trump or other very senior people who are responsible in some sense, certainly not in some sense, who are responsible for inciting those people, many of whom were sort of duped, you might say, by them or by Tucker Carlson or by others on social media into being insurrectionists. But I do think it's very important. I hope everyone gets punished all the way up and down the line if they did something illegal, if they did something wrong, or illegal at least. Can't punish people always for just things that are wrong. But storming the Capitol is more than wrong. It's illegal and dangerous. But I think these punishments have actually had a good effect. Why wasn't there violence? Why has there, thankfully, been a little less violence than I think some of us expected in November 22, in the next election, when there were closely contested races in states like Arizona with election deniers? What about Trump coming to New York for the indictment a month ago? I think people are a little bit deterred by the fact that people like them, who believe what they were being told by former presidents or by social media or by a major cable news network, are paying a price for that. There's a reason the rule of law needs to have behind it the threat of just punishment for your actions. So let's hold people accountable at the top and the bottom. But But let's get to the people at the top, too, because I think one other problem I have with some of the discussion about the current situation is it focuses so much on, let's say, the mobs, on the credulous people who believe conspiracy theories, on the people who are incited by demagogues, on the prejudices and bigotry and even hatreds, resentments, anxieties of all the people out there, which the demagogues then take advantage of. But look, this is a huge country. Things change. We have a lot of technological and cultural change. People are going to have anxieties and resentments. And to some degree, there's always going to be prejudice. There's always going to be the potential for real hatred and real cruelty and real violence. But what makes it possible, I think, is the demagogues who exploit that, and they should be held most accountable for what's happening. And secondly, and here's the point I want to make, it's the rationalizers and the excusers and the enablers of the demagogues who also have to be held accountable. You know, when I was very young, I read a book by Eric Hoffer, who was a big figure way back when, 50s, 60s, into the 70s. Very shrewd analyst of totalitarianism and what had happened in the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany and Italy and so forth, called The Will to Believe. That was a great issue when I was young in sort of political science and political philosophy and sociology circles. How did people believe what turned out to be extremely dangerous, damaging, and horrible, really, sets of beliefs? Why did people want to believe in the communist future or in Nazi claims? But the believers are a problem. The true believers are a real problem. But they don't actually form a majority of most societies. They're usually a pretty strong or pretty weak, depending on the situation, minority. The people who make the true believers' dangerous beliefs powerful are the enablers, the people who should know better, who do know better in certain respects, but who go along, who have rationalizations, excuses, and justifications for the resentments of for the beliefs of the true believers. And they don't like the true believers much. They're not true believers themselves, but they explain, well, you shouldn't, they're a little wrong about a few things, they overstate things, but the party of which they're a part has to govern because they're doing some other good things. So we can't criticize them too much because we have to be in alliance with them. We've seen that in spades, in my view, in the last 6, 7 years on the right. We've seen it in the past on the left, though, with communists and fellow travelers 30, 40, 50 years ago. So it's not only a thing of the right or the left, though I think the current problem is a problem on the right, but it's those enablers who make possible the damage that is done. And I'll be just honest, it's the Republican elected officials who haven't had the courage to stand up to the demagogues, to Trump and to others, who make possible the power of Trump and the others. If Trump had been president for 4 years without having a whole party capitulate to him, he would have been a one-term president. He would have done some damage, in my view, maybe a few good things as well, but mostly damage. But that would be it. He'd be gone. Why is he still so powerful? Because the whole party went in his direction. And why did younger politicians decide that the way to the future was to be a follower of his and to even go further than him? Because he had already turned the party in that direction. Why had he, but to say that he had turned the party in that direction takes away agency from all the people who chose to go along. These were grown-up elected politicians. They could have stood up. Some of them might have lost. Some of them might have lost, but some of them might not have lost. Or in losing, they would have made a point. You know, Gene McCarthy ran for president in 1967, 68. He lost, but he made a point about the Vietnam War, and he changed the course of history over the next few years. Winning in the short term is not the most important thing. An awful lot of elected officials thought it was. An awful lot of prominent newspapers and magazines also thought that they had to go along with their allies. And they deserve, in my view, a little more blame than they normally get for the behavior that they've made possible. And so, as I said, it's mostly for me a problem on the right. It's a problem on the left, too. It's the university administrators who go along with a few kids or with a few activists on campus who want to launch an anti-Semitic campaign, a BDS campaign or something like that. Of course, the main people one has to hold accountable are the people pushing it, but the people who don't stand up to it, or the people who, sort of acknowledge it and excuse it, they have a lot of, and those people are often more powerful, obviously. They have a lot of responsibility too. So let's hold people accountable, let's hold leaders accountable. Final point about all of our efforts, people ask me, how do we know if we're going to win or not? How should we be pessimistic? Should we be optimistic? It's always safer to be pessimistic. What's the line? It's better to be pessimistic, because then when something good happens, you're pleasantly surprised. And if something bad happens, you can say, "See, I had the situation right." But it's not actually a laughing matter. The truth is, we don't know. History is contingent. Contingency is underestimated in our day and age. We all want to have explanations for everything. Social science should be like natural science and like physics. It doesn't really work that way. My late uncle, Milton Himmelfarb, who was a very distinguished thinker about things Jewish and about things about Israel and many other issues, was at the AJC for, 40 years, I think, edited their yearbook, a friend of the ADL, once famously in a review essay of very learned books about the Holocaust and how it was possible in German history and German culture and Weimar and all these, the Depression, all these deep causes, said all those causes were crucial, but at the end of the day, Hitler was crucial too. He was an incredibly skillful demagogue, and his followers, he made possible, obviously, horrible, horrible things, and his line was, "No Hitler, no Holocaust." And we're not certain that that's true, but it's a good reminder of the contingency of history. So we don't know where exactly the challenges will come, in my view. We know that they'll come in all kinds of areas, in politics, in the educational system, in the business world, in civil society, and we all need to confront those challenges wherever we have some ability to do so. But let's not overthink the future in a sense. Let's not try to say, well, this is the place that's going to matter, or this is the moment that's going to matter, this is the turning point, or not the turning point, or the inflection point. I've spent a lot of time in Washington trying to think, this is a big moment, and then half the time you're wrong, and the big moment isn't the moment you expected. Or the key battle, this is true in war, I think, too, the key battle isn't necessarily the battle that gets the most build-up. It turns out to be some other battle that people haven't paid as much close attention to. You need to fight bigotry, hatred, incitement to violence wherever we see it. And we need to fight it when it's exerted against other groups as well, obviously, as against Jews, because we do know from history that it doesn't stay with one group, and it doesn't stay with the Jews. It doesn't confine to the Jews. If it begins with the Jews, and if it doesn't begin with the Jews, it gets to the Jews. And so for reasons of both the interest of the Jewish community, but more important, I would even say, for the interests of our society as a whole and of the world, we need to fight wherever we can against these forces. I'll close with one of my favorite quotations from Tocqueville, the great French thinker who came to America almost 200 years ago now, and one of the greatest observers of American democracy. And Tocqueville, right near the end of Democracy in America, talks about the challenges of the modern world. We can't be sure that we will succeed in meeting those challenges, but he writes, "Let us therefore have that salutary fear of the future." I've always liked that, because people say, don't fear the future. Well, you'd be crazy not to fear the future a little bit, but let's have a salutary fear of the future that makes one watchful and combative, not that soft and idle terror that wears hearts down and enervates them. So let's be watchful, not complacent, not fatalistic, watchful and combative. That's what the ADL has been for so many years, and that's what you all, I think by being here today, you suggest that that's what the ADL will continue to do. Good luck. Thank you.